This is Jeff J. Brown, China Rising Radio Sinoland on the D-Day beaches of Normandy. And Sputnik asked me to contribute to one of their articles, and they forgot to send me the link, and they just sent it. And they apologized. So it's a little bit dated from last month, but still quite good. And by the way, I did, these kind of things, I get paid nothing. All I get is some recognition. And so if you appreciate my research, writing, contextualizing what is really going on in today's headlines and behind the scenes, please make a contribution above and below YouTube, SoundCloud, and on the China Rising Radio Sinoland website to either fundraiser, Patreon, or PayPal. Thank you. This one is entitled, Closure of Houston Consulate Marks Shift of U.S.'s China Policy Towards Confrontation. Scholars warn. Hey, I guess I'm a scholar. Jeff J. Brown interviewed on Sputnik News. Here we go. On Tuesday evening, the U.S. government ordered Chinese diplomats to close the country's consulate in Houston, Texas, in 72 hours. International observers have discussed China's potential retaliatory measures in the wake of Washington's decision and the future of the country's bilateral relations. Providing no details on the abrupt demand to close the Chinese consulate, the U.S. State Department claimed that the step was taken, quote, in order to protect American intellectual property and Americans' private information, end of quote. China has engaged for years in massive illegal spying and influence operations throughout the United States against U.S. government officials and American citizens, State Department spokeswoman Morgan Ortagus stated while commenting on the development. The Chinese Foreign Ministry denounced the closure of the People's Republic's diplomatic mission in Houston as an unprecedented escalation, vowing to, quote, react with firm countermeasures, end of quote, if the U.S. does not backtrack on its decision. Subtitle, U.S.-China bilateral relations may continue to deteriorate. And here is a quote from one of my fellow scholars. Quote, at this stage, we don't know the details behind the decision to ask the Chinese consulate in Houston to leave within 72 hours. End of quote, says Dr. Stephen Nagy, a senior associate professor at the International Christian University in Tokyo and a fellow at the Canadian Global Affairs Institute, the CGAI. The latest diplomatic row comes amid the background of worsening Sino-American relations related to ongoing trade frictions, the coronavirus pandemic, and the U.S. announcement that it regards Beijing's claims to the South China Sea under the so-called 9-dash line as null and void. The People's Republic is likely to resort to a systematic response to the latest White House move, claims Adam Nee, director of the Canberra-based China Policy Center. Beijing, this is Mr. Scholar Adam Nee, said, quote, Beijing will likely retaliate by ordering the closure of one of its U.S. consulates in China, He foresees admitting that Beijing and Washington are locked in intensifying strategic competition, as well as the worst deterioration of relations in decades. End of quote by Mr. Nee. However, as Beijing usually does not want to appear to be escalating tensions, China's retaliation to the Trump administration's demand is likely to be limited to targeting a single U.S. consulate in a second-tier city, or perhaps in one of the first-tier cities, Stephen Nagy ventures. Both observers believe that one can expect further escalation in the days and weeks to come, with 2020 elections nearing. Quote, this means pressure on all fronts, including the most sensitive areas such as Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and Taiwan, end of quote, Nagy observes, suggesting that U.S.-China bilateral relations will continue to deteriorate in the coming months and even years. Quote, underlying all this strategic competition and the sharp turn of U.S.'s China policy towards confrontation, end of quote, Adam Nee warns. It's hardly surprising that Washington and Beijing, quote, reached this point this quickly, end of quote, given that Trump's top advisors, whom he seems to trust, are all China hawks and that the November election is due to take place in less than 100 days, notes Tom Luongo, geopolitical analysis and publisher of Gold, Goats, and Guns newsletter. Having ruled out the possibility of a direct clash between the U.S. and China, the geopolitical analyst opines that, quote, Trump seems to be willing to push diplomatic and economic aspects of hybrid war to their limit while only threatening physical confrontation, end of quote. Tom Luongo continues, quote, I think Trump and his advisors all believe that putting strong economic pressure on China will hurt them more than it hurts the U.S., and that this will eventually rein them in somewhat, end of quote, he suggests. According to Jeff J. Brown, who is Jeff J. Brown? The editor of China Rising Radio Sinoland, producer of China Tech News Flash, and author of the China Trilogy, quote, Western global capitalism realizes that socialist China is winning the 21st century hands down, and its increasing desperation is apparent with an ever-rising cycle of ploys to suppress the latter, end of quote. I continue, that guy named Jeff J. Brown, I continue. Japan was forced into war with the United States in 1941, with much less trade aggression applied to it. Trump's presidency has piled on more than enough casus belli against China, but Beijing will avoid taking U.S. war bait at any cost to protect its people, economy, and long-term objectives. To save face with its citizenry, China may request that the U.S. close one of its consulates in country like Wuhan, but they should shut down the one in Hong Kong, which is Color Revolution Central. Two birds with one stone, Mr. Brown adds. End of quotes from me. Prior to the demand to close the U.S. consulate, the U.S. slapped sanctions on 11 Chinese organizations on 20 July over the alleged abuse of human rights in Xinjiang by prohibiting them from buying American technology and other goods. Earlier, Washington imposed visa and asset restrictions against Chinese politicians over purported abuses of the Uyghur minority. The Chinese government responded to the latter batch of U.S. measures in tit-for-tat manner, exerting sanctions against American Senators Ted Cruz and Mark Rubio. This is Jeff J. Brown, China Rising Radio Sinoland, signing out, and have a good day.